The next lesson is on solving equations using algebra. And our first problem is about a puppy in a backyard. And they want to build an enclosure for the puppy. So they said that the enclosure is a hexagon. It's a six-sided shape with one pair of opposite sides running the same distance along the length of two parallel flower beds. So we have two parallel sides right here, these two right here. And it says to draw a little sketch of this so that you understand what they're talking about. So it says there are two boundaries at one end of the flower beds that are 10 foot and 12 foot. So let's just mark that 10 foot and 12 foot. And it says on the other end, the two boundaries are 15 feet and 20 feet. So this would be 15 and this would be 20. It says, if the perimeter of the enclosure is 137 feet total, what is the length of each side that runs along the flower bed? So these are parallel and equivalent sides right here. So if they're equivalent, we can just name them N. Okay, they're the same length and they're parallel to each other. So if we have two of these and then 10, 12, 15, 20, and the perimeter is 137 feet. It wants to know how long are these two sides. So if we were to set up a tape diagram, which we've been working with, a tape diagram here, if this represented the whole enclosure, this total here would be 137 feet. Now, what does it have in the 137? Well, it has two ends, right? It has an N, another N, and then it has a 10, has a 12, has a 15, and it has a 20. Right, so these represent all the pieces of the outside perimeter of the enclosure for the dog. So what we need to do is find out what these ends equal over here. So in order to do that, if we know the whole thing is 137, so we can take this amount right here and figure out what this is. So if we add all of these up, 20, 30, 40, 57, this is 57 feet. We know that if we take 137 and subtract the 57 feet, we end up with 80 feet remaining, correct? Yeah, so these would have to be the 80 feet that are left over. So each one of these, if we take 80 and divide that in two pieces, because we have two ends, then that would equal 40. Okay, so each of these sides would equal 40 feet. Okay, now that's using a tape diagram to solve this problem, but it's also using an equation. So let's use this to solve the equation. So we started out with two n's. So that's what I'm going to put, 2n. And then I added all of the other sides, 10, 12, 15, 20, and they all equal 137. So we can write two n's, or actually I could have wrote just n plus n. Okay. So we have n plus 10 plus 12 plus 15 plus 20 equals 137 feet. So how do we go about solving this? Well, we did the same thing. How we solve using the tape diagram is exactly how we're going to solve this algebraically. So the first thing that we did was we added up all of these numbers here. What makes up this amount? So if we have n plus n, and I add my 10, 12, 15, and 20 again, I end up with n plus n plus 57 equals 137. And all I'm doing is combining the other sides together to get one number. So I have n plus 57 equals 137. So what did I do with the 57? Well, if you remember, I took the 57 and I subtracted it from the 137. So that's exactly what I'm going to do in my equation. okay? And this is the subtraction property of equality. If I subtract the same thing from both sides of my equation will still have the same value. So if I subtract this, I get 80 on this side, which means that n plus n is going to have to be 80. So if I take 80 then and divide that by 2, and I take n and divide that by 2, what do I have if I take two n's and divide them by 2? I have 1n remaining. And the easier way to say that is if I started out with what I had and I combine these two terms that are alike. I take 1n plus 1n equals 2n. Then you can see it a lot better. So let me combine these two like terms and put 2n up here. Then you can see if I divide this, I have 2 over 2, which equals 1n. 1n then equals 40 feet. Okay, so we're using the properties of equality to solve these. The first thing we want to do is find the zero. We want to find the zero. We want to find the additive inverse of this number so that we can take this out and make 0 pairs out of this. We want to make zeros. So we take this and we made a 0 here. 2n plus 0 is just plain 2n. And then what we want to do is we want to find the 1n out of this one. So if we find 1n, we're going to be dividing by 2. The other way we could have solved this problem, as you know, dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. We can multiply by the reciprocal also. So there are two different ways we can do that. I can show you this way too. So if we have 2n's equals 80, and then we want to solve this by multiplying the whole thing by 1/2. And multiply this by 1/2. So if I take a half of 2n, if I had two n's together and I took a half of those, I would have n remaining. And I take a half of 80, which also equals 40. Okay.